an image is very hard to keep the same. And also because it changes and evolves, we try to build on it, but it's always kind of falling apart too, as much as we're building on it. And yeah, I mean, it just becomes this kind of exhausting dance to keep it up. I think
Yeah.
everyone has a little bit of image, but when you're really like image focused, it becomes a really exhausting thing to do. It becomes like you have to you have to spin a lot of plates to keep the thing going. You can't let them fall, and you got all these things to kind of maintain. And then it's just like, where's the room for you?
This is Way of the Artist with Brandon Colby Cook and Evan Schulte,
Identifying your blocks and demystifying your struggles
so that you can claim your own path
and make your life a work of art.
Man, sometimes trying to figure out what the hell we're going to talk about is just a big old wrestling match, and man, did it take us a while to get here. But here we are. And what's interesting is like we talked for like hours about all sorts of stuff. And then we tried to get really focused and we're like, okay, what are we going to talk about for this conversation? And initially we threw out some ideas of some topics we had, and we're just gonna maybe. And then we went and talked for 2 hours, and it all comes back to one of the ideas we had in the first place, which I find kind of hilarious. So I feel like this conversation was a seed that was planted a long time ago, but then we had a big conversation which gave it new context. And now we're here talking about it. And I think what's exciting for me about this conversation is it's one of those conversations where we're coming in not really knowing what it is. So it's more of a discovery for us, which I think is kind of cool. Because sometimes I think we come in and we're like, okay, we got some things to say. We have some opinions, some thoughts. On this one, it's more like, let's open up to the idea. We know it's a thing, but maybe we can figure out what it actually is. And we know it relates to the artist journey or just kind of the philosophy of Way of the Artist, but we don't necessarily know what we're going to uncover through it. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess you're leaving it to me. I mean, I guess people clicked on the title of the episode if you're listening to this one, but yeah, living up to your image. Yeah, man, it was a battle getting to this one, but that's sometimes the way that the creative process works. It doesn't always just flow in magically like a fairy through the window.
Yeah.
Taking you away to Never Land. Sometimes it's just like you got your shovel and your spade and you're just working the earth, man, and you're like, we got to keep going. We'll hit water at some point in time.
Yeah. Yeah,
it was one of those ones.
I think it's like, the creative process is like that sometimes. It's just it's a bit of a grind. It can be somewhat of a slog. It's not that our conversation was necessarily a slog, but there was a lot of head scratching, and there was a lot of like, yeah, that's really good, but I don't know what to do with that.
At least at this moment.
Yeah. And then I think what's kind of interesting about it, I mean, we'll get into this in a moment, but like what was interesting is like we talked about all these things, and then they all kind of came back to this, like living up to your image, but in a way that was so unexpected. Like, I think if anyone was listening to the conversation we had to get here, they never would have really guessed earlier on that this is where we would have landed, because it was so almost unrelated seeming at the time. And now in certain ways, you're like, well, actually that kind of relates. And we talked about a lot of things, like just to give people some context, we talked about, freedom, what is freedom, choice. We talked about trust. We kind of talked about the relationship between trust and having choice, and a bunch of other things. But those
opinion and influence and
influence, right?
Yeah.
And those were all things that kind of played into this, and it kind of brought us here. And I think at the end of the day, I mean, kind of what we're trying to get to is, I think we're advocates of, creating more freedom for the creative mind, for the artist, right? And so how does this kind of living up to your image relate to that, and choice and trust and all of that? So we'll try to get into it. I know that. And I think I'm probably going to have a few unique discoveries, as we go through.
Yeah, we can always we always hope, right, that that's what's going to happen. Yeah. And I think that even more broadly speaking as well, like living, I think you can look at the realm of like artists, right? And when you think of something like living up to an image, in many ways, like it's most easy to point out people who achieve a certain level of fame and celebrity and that sort of thing, and there's they have whole teams devoted to to image, and publicists and stylists and PR people and all that kind of shit. So there's that element of it that's going on, but really I would argue that is simply like, it's like a bigger budget version of something that we're all participating in. Mm-hmm. And it has been that way forever, as far as I can tell. But I mean, especially now, just with how much social media plays a part in all of that as well, quite directly, in that we're all involved. We all have these sort of online lives and personas. That's somewhat of a necessity in our society today, in which we're all required to sort of, publicize and curate, parts of our lives for other people, mm-hmm. Who might be interested. So that's a really interesting side to all of this. But even if we want to take it down from there, because I don't even know if I necessarily want to get into a conversation about social media. Maybe we will. I won't rule it out. But, for all of us, there kind of comes a point in everyone's lives, which I would presume happens fairly early. I'm sure that a psychologist who has studied this probably could identify around what age this happens. But suddenly there is this image that we have to uphold, that we feel a certain kind of pressure to keep up, not only for other people, but for ourselves. There's a lot of really interesting things that are going on there. And I think that what we're kind of coming into this conversation with is how that is such a detriment to our lives, how it can be such a detriment to our lives, how that can really compromise us as people, and it can compromise our creativity, not mm-hmm. simply as artists, but creativity in life itself, which is essential to life. Creativity is such an essential ingredient to life. So I've said a lot of things. I'm going to stop saying things. Brandon, you say some things.
I want to say that, mostly the image becomes detrimental when it comes to things like freedom and connection and relationship and, a lot of other things. It becomes very detrimental and limiting, and it actually restricts freedom and restricts choice, because by not being fully truthful and honest about where you're at and what's actually going on, for one, you begin to believe your own image, you believe your own hype, and then you're acting and behaving from a place that isn't actually where you're at, and that causes a lot of problems. I use this analogy in the courses that I teach, but say you want to build a bridge from where you are to your dreams. The two problems that most people do is they start the bridge too far away from where they actually are, which is their image. They start from their image, not where they actually are. And the other thing is that they don't build the bridge far enough because they're too scared to say what they really want. So they say what they think they can get. And so you build the bridge too short and people wonder why they don't, achieve their dreams. And I think the image is the first part of the bridge. It's you're putting the bridge so far away from where you're at. You have to swim or travel without a bridge for so long to even get to where you are saying you are. And then if you ever do get there, well, it looks like you haven't gotten anywhere because you're still living up to that image. So that's a part of it. The other thing I want to say, though, is I don't think the image is all bad. I think that there's a good side to it. I think that, we'd be amiss if we didn't actually mention this, but like the part of the image is like, it's a bit of a game, and you need it in nature and you need it in society and culture. And let me explain. In nature, they're predators. And this is the same for the human race as much as it is for animals. The predator goes for the weakest link. The predator gets the weak one, right? Weakness is going to make you the prey, in that world. And, weakness is not acceptable in nature, because the weak die. You know what I mean? So image has a lot to do with making us not look weak and protecting us against that. And if you think human beings are the only ones that posture, you just start watching the Nature Channel, man. You'll start seeing that there's all sorts of animals, and they'll get hurt, they'll get injured or whatever, and they will act tougher than they are. They will act better than they are because they need the appearance that they are not weak, right? And so human beings do the same thing, and we do that with each other, and we do that in a lot of scenarios. So I think keeping that in mind, image has its place. It has a necessity. And I've said this before on the podcast. There are predators out there, people who will take advantage of you, manipulative motherfuckers, sociopaths, psychopaths, narcissists, and others who prey on people who are weaker or more vulnerable, and they'll use things against you to get stuff from you. And, that's something that we all have to navigate the world through. So it's not like drop your image and just, always show your vulnerabilities at all times. I think you show your vulnerabilities to maybe yourself when you're alone and to the people who are closest to you that you trust. But I'm not saying, and I don't think you are either, that we just drop the image entirely and just walk around like totally like emotionally naked to the world. I don't think that's a good way to do life. Yeah. So I want to say that to start off.
Yeah. And just to comment on like your kind of animal reference as well, because there are some, I think that there are some distinctions to be made there. It's like, yeah, there's some similar traits for sure. But for animals, it's like a lot of the posturing is almost always for, reasons of survival.
Or sex,
or sex, which is in some respects is a form of survival. It's of carrying on, right? So that's when it comes up. The majority of human image and posturing has nothing to do with that.
Yes. The majority of it doesn't have to do with that. I agree.
Yeah, it's an idea of certainly that we need to appear a certain way in order to be accepted, because we are social creatures. We need to be accepted. We need to, we want to have friends. We need to, there's a number of arguments that we could make for why there's a degree to which we participate in it. For me, at this point in time, I see it somewhat as a matter of convenience more than anything. There's an image, I have an identity of some kind, and it's really just, it's so, to a certain extent, it's so you don't have to constantly explain yourself to every single person you meet all the time. We can sort of take an abstract of you as a human being. But the challenge is that there's serious limitations to it, and we can become really, I don't know. I'm hesitant to use this word, but I think it is somewhat fitting. But like we can become enslaved to it. We can become enslaved to this image that's sort of a product of our own thoughts and ideas and opinions of who we are, in combination with the thoughts and opinions of other people, our friends, our family, our culture, our society, all that sort of stuff, and having to live up to that can be has a lot of limitations. Something we should all be very conscientious about and concerned about at some level. For my own experience, like, you know, full transparency, like I was sitting in, you know, in a, like I meditate daily, and I was examining something that was coming up. Like anxiety is something that I've dealt with within a lot of my life, and trying to take more of an attitude of just being sort of joyfully curious about what that thing is. And I was looking at some of my shit recently and was just like, I was like, oh, you care way too much about what people think, my man. Like, this is all, you know, oh, well, like, why are you afraid to say this? Why are you afraid of this thought? Why are you afraid of showing this part of who you genuinely feel yourself to be? And it's like, well, I don't know what people would think about that. I don't know, you know, if I get really honest with myself, you know, because it's not something that it's not something that's flattering. You know, you don't want to, it's so funny. We care so deeply in our society about what people think about us, but it's not cool for people to see that to see that, even though it's just everywhere. You know what I mean? Even though that we're all participating in this game, we all have to pretend like we're not. You know, like it's like you gotta have the image that you don't care.
Yeah, it's like masturbation.
Yeah, like it's totally like it's such a
it's like
a weird.
You can't talk about it, but everyone does it, and you know it's like that's the funny thing about image, though. It's like and I don't mean to cut you off, but I think you're raising a really cool point, which is like, yeah, it's something that we all kind of contend with, and yet none of us are allowed to talk about it with each other because we're all posturing, and it's like weird because, you know, for the most part, I think I do think you kind of. It's a gradual stage process. Like I think you probably care a lot less what people think about you than you did when you were younger, but you're not totally through that part of your journey yet. And I think we're all in various stages of this, letting go of what people think of us. And maybe it gets more provoked in certain areas and little or whatever, and maybe a little less in some. But yeah, you brought up another really good word about that whole thing, the enslaved thing. And I think that's a really good way to kind of talk about this, because yeah, it's like, well, where does this image restrict my freedom? Right? Like, because you do become a slave to it, because once you kind of have it, you kind of have to live up to it. And sometimes you get an image that was bestowed upon you. It's not even something you chose, but people happen to see you that way. And then it kind of became your identity. So you kind of play into it. Like maybe you're the funny guy, you know, or you're the intelligent person, whatever it is. Right. And it's like people start to live into these roles, and sometimes they're not positive. Sometimes they're more negative. Like you're the edgy guy, or you're the whatever, or you're like the, you know, you're some negative thing, but people will live into those too, and they'll kind of own it, and they'll kind of actually make it good for themselves, or they'll like empower it. Right. So yeah, but then you become a little bit enslaved to it. And I think like you're bringing up an interesting point, because yeah, you're talking about it, and I think it's really cool that you're talking about it. But if it were that simple in most scenarios where we could just talk about it, it would probably be easier. But I think that a lot of situations don't really provide room for that. If you're talking with friends and people that are just kind of collectively like accepting and you're in a good community, yeah, people will be open to it. But I think for the general public, like go online, you want to do that online and just say blah, 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 blah. Like maybe your social community group will accept you, but if you get into the wrong, I don't want to say wrong group, but if you open it up to the whole wide world, oh man, like you'll see the ugliness, of bearing your soul.
Well, I mean, you look at just, why so many people have create anonymous,
Totally.
IDs, right? You go about things anonymously because for that very reason, because you want to hide who you are, because you're afraid that, of what would happen if people knew you were saying the things that you're saying and doing the things that you were doing. Yeah, there's a huge reason for that. And I want to propose something. We're getting it might be going really far down the rabbit hole on this one, but because I'm interested in this whole thing of like, okay, so why are we participating in this whole image thing, of keeping up these images, keeping up these appearances for others and for ourselves to an extent. And I think that it's got something to do with a sense of safety. I think it has something because, this image that I've managed to kind of create and cultivate at this point in time has gotten me a few things in life that are good. Like it's gotten me to a certain place. And I've heard it on more than one occasion and probably read it in a few others where it's, we're not so much afraid of the unknown as we are afraid of losing what we have.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think that's something that factors into this. There's like, well, if I suddenly, start doing the things or being the person and whatever that I feel myself to be, these people might not accept me anymore. I might lose these people. I might lose these things. And look, there's definitely that possibility. I mean, depending on what sort of circle you find yourself in today's day and age and culture, this, the ridiculousness of cancel culture and people not able to have disagreements and have civilized conversation it's fucking bonkers, man.
Mm-hmm.
It's totally insane. It's not how we move forward as a society, just as my little soapbox moment there. But, there are, I don't want to discount that there are risks, you being, who you feel yourself to be and being honest and truthful, can come at a price. And we have seen that happen. But I don't know. I think it's an interesting side of this. I also want to say that on the other angle of being afraid of losing other people, I think that we also have a side of ourselves. There's a component to ourselves in which we like to hold people into their image as well.
Yes.
Because if you start changing and doing things differently, I don't know if I can trust you. It's easier for me if you're just this person and you're always this person and that's just the way it is. It's another sort of kind of fear thing of control and whatever. So that's my sort of hypothesis that I'm putting out there. I don't know, Brandon, thoughts?
Man, you brought up some good points. That's all I really have to say about that. I think that your hypothesis and your presentation of some of those points, I think are just really important elements to this conversation. For one, I can really relate to the whole thing about not sharing my full self with everybody, because there are certain things that like I'm interested in that I don't think people will be accepting of or be open to, or they'll be judgmental of it. And so I don't talk about it. I'll mention one because fuck it. You know what? if you don't like it, tough shit. I don't really care. You know what I mean? Like I'm not gonna, and if you don't want to listen to this podcast because the way I think, that's fine. But for example, I have an interest in firearms and I'm a supporter of them. I actually think firearms are a good thing. I also think vehicles are a good thing. You know what kills more people than firearms? Cars. But yet people are like, no, firearms are bad. Well, the thing is like a firearm is just a machine, right? I could go off and I can tell you my opinions and I can share my thoughts. But the thing is, a lot of people, especially like people in the film industry, right? Like in spite of all the movies we make and all the shows we make where we use firearms and we use this stuff, there's a lot of people that are like, firearms are bad, cancel them all, get rid of them, and they're not even open to hearing a conversation. And I look at that and I go, well, like, I don't tell you this, and lots of people don't tell you this because, it's more popular opinion, at least in that community, not everywhere, but in that community, to be anti-gun, anti-firearm. But, here's an interesting thought, and I just want to throw this out there. And I know this is kind of different from the conversation, but I think it relates. It's like, if all of a sudden you couldn't drive anymore and cars weren't allowed and it had to be automated, meaning that you could never control a vehicle again because somebody did something bad, would you be okay with that? And most of the people who are anti-gun would probably say, no, they're not okay with that. That's what you're doing to people when you say anti-gun. I mean, it's the same thing you're doing, right? So it's like, I think that image restricts us from having conversations and opening up a dialogue and actually connecting. And that's one of the great limitations of it. And that's just one of many interests that I have. And I don't share everything with everybody because I know that some people, they're set in their ways. They're programmed by the media. They hear a story, they hear something, and they think, oh, that's bad. And then they just kind of get it in their mind. And then all of a sudden someone comes along and they go, well, I don't agree with that. And it's like, all of a sudden, well, you're bad because you like something that I don't like. And it's like, so I keep a certain image with people, not because I care what they think, because I'm mostly beyond that, although I do get caught every now and then with some things, but I'm mostly beyond that. But now I just do it. A lot of things I do are just out of social politeness. I just do it because I don't want to have an argument with people, and I don't want to have a debate, and I don't want to whatever. But I've been in the practice of just saying, like, you know what, Brandon, fuck it. I think it's just because I'm getting older, and I think that also I just don't care as much about what people think of me. And I'm finding that people who saw things once one way are actually opening up to me. But that's me, like, having the courage to drop my image. Because here's the thing. I'm a part of the film community. I want to be accepted by my peers. I want to be in the group. I don't want to be the weird guy that, want to be weird creatively, but I don't want to be weird, against the culture to some degree. I want to still be part of the group. And I'm learning that I don't have to have the image to be a part of the group, but that's been a really hard lesson for me in that area. And I'm sure a lot of people can relate in their own areas. But so you brought that up, and you brought up some other points, which honestly, at this moment, I don't forget what I was going to say about that. I forget what I was going to say. I do forget. I don't forget I was going to say about them. That was hard to get out. But I think you brought up some really good points. And I think this is the kind of discussion I wanted to have, where we kind of identify, like, what makes us keep this thing in place, and what is it going to take to, like, let it down, to give us that freedom.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's interesting that in this conversation, both yourself and myself, there's already been a few things in which my own personal image and your own personal image has come to the surface in a point where there's a certain degree of uncertainty and conflict. Talking about meditating and anxiety and worrying about how people, what people will think of me. Just saying that was a thing of like there was a moment of second guessing it as I was saying it. You know what I mean? Of being like, oh, like do that image, that ego, jumps in there and says like, are you sure you want to be saying this right now? What might people think of you? Just as you sharing, what you shared is like, there was a moment, I, could see people who were just listening, you can't see, but like, you could hear it, there was a little bit of a pause. There was a bit of a preamble sort of working up to just like, all right, I'm going to say this. I'm going to say this. I'm going to say this. Right.
Totally. Yes.
It's such it works in such subtle ways, subtle or maybe not so subtle ways, but like it's quite extraordinary how present that is in our lives, how much we live with this constant thing of how are people looking at me. It's this was actually something that was a really fascinating discovery for me in acting. And the last play that I had done, while I was working on it, I was also reading this book, which, as a matter of fact, I'm rereading at this moment in time, called Freedom from the Known by Jiddu Krishnamurti. Incredible book, people. Just, if you get anything from me ever, just read somebody else's book. But there was this thing, and it has a lot to do with what we're talking about here, but the author was saying, we are as human beings, we're very rarely in relationship to each other or with each other. We're more often in relationship to our image of each other and our image of ourselves. And I remember reading that and going, and it became something that helped me understand my acting on a new level. Because that's a beautiful thing about, the arts and acting in particular, where it's like there's most of what happens in life translates across into acting. They're usually, what's true of one is usually true of the other. But realizing just like, oh, in every scene that I'm playing here with the other people that I'm in, that are in these scenes with me, these characters, there's an image that I'm trying to put across to them. I want them to see me in a certain way. I want them to think of me in a certain way. And it's changed profoundly the way that I approach how I work as an actor. I'm going into a little bit of sort of craft speak regarding this, so bear with me, everybody. But like one of the big things that's taught in acting is this idea of objective, that your character has an objective, something they're trying to achieve in the scene, something they are trying to achieve in the course of the play. Just as like sort of a footnote to that, it's a massively misunderstood concept in acting, in my opinion, partially because of what I'm saying, because that discovery of sort of that relationship and image impacted greatly how I saw this thing of objective, where it was like, well, it's not, objective is not just some sort of thing that I'm barging through with. It is completely relational to everybody that I'm with. And that has so much to do with the image. That has so much to do with how they see me, because how they see me is going to determine how they treat me, whether they give me the things that I want that I want them to give me. It's so many, it impacted so many things, but it changed my acting for the better, in my opinion, just simply because suddenly I felt much more dynamic and spontaneous and alive and present when I was in performance, because it wasn't about me after some arbitrary, conceptual, objective, but it was something that was had some sort of reality that was permeating underneath everything all the time. Yeah.
I can relate. I mean, I can relate to, particularly in acting, the image and stuff like that. And I think, for a career path like that and many others, it's your image does actually have something to do often with like what will get you auditions or roles or opportunities. And I think that acting is particularly challenging for people in that regard because the image parts kind of becomes your brand. It kind of becomes what you're known for. And I think sometimes, you can, I don't know, you can kind of like, you can become what you're selling in a way. And I think like I see this in politicians, like, um, uh, I don't know. I think when I was younger, I was a little more duped, I suppose, by some politicians. Now I'm a little more, I think, wise to their ways. But I've begun to see the image that they play and who they actually are a little more. And I become better at being able to separate what they're saying from what they're doing, and they're getting a more holistic picture of a person. Um, I think that a good example of this is maybe to bring it back to something a little more tangible is being like in a relationship, emotionally, maybe with a partner or maybe just with a friend. And there's a saying, if someone tells you who they are, believe them, or if they show you who they are, believe them. I've talked about this in the podcast before, but I'll just mention again because I think it has context here. Being in an abusive relationship. Now, first of all, I didn't even know what emotional abuse was. I didn't even know that existed. I'd heard of physical abuse. I'd heard of verbal abuse. I didn't know that there was emotional abuse and intellectual abuse apparently as well. But I was experiencing emotional abuse. Didn't even know that was happening until someone came along and pointed it out. And I was like, oh, wow. I didn't even know that was a thing. But the relationship got abusive and it got more and more abusive and more abusive. And to the point where it was quite toxic. And eventually it ended. And when it ended, I remember being like, why the hell did I stay in that so long? It was obviously so bad. And it was so clear to me kind of like when it was over that it was so bad. And then all I could really focus on was like, well, why did I stay in something so bad for so long? At least in, relative to me. And I knew it was bad to some degree, but for some reason I still didn't leave, And so I think image kind of relates this, and maybe this is more about how we see others, because I saw this person in such this perfect light. I always focused on the good things they did. I focused on how they had been in the past, maybe a nice thing they had done. And I really tried to not, it was like dissonance, it's like, I'm just not looking at the things they were doing that were bad or abusive or manipulative or whatever. And I think that image is one of those things where it actually doesn't help us to relate to each other as we are. And you mentioned that earlier. And that was the big thing I wanted to bring up, is that we're relating to the image of somebody. And so, I was in an abusive relationship because I was relating to the image I had of the person, not the actual person. And now that I'm out of that and free of that and kind of have awarenesses about that, I try to look at people more as the people as opposed to the image. But up until then, I'd say a lot of people I related to, including this person in particular, I related more to them through their image of what I thought of them or how they presented themselves than I actually related to them. And I think that my friendships and my bonds with people have become so much more real and genuine as I've gotten older, because I stopped relating to image and I start connecting to people as more truthfully as they are. And one caveat, I don't think you ever really truly ever fully know somebody, even yourself, but you do the best you can.
Well, I mean, and yeah, that's almost a different rabbit hole, but that's because who we are isn't stable.
Yes.
That's a kind of a big fallacy. It's like, we're who we are moment to moment to moment to moment. And you've sort of been pointing that out, is that, when you're relating to someone simply as an image, you're relating to how someone was as opposed to how they are.
Yes.
And it's interesting because, that's, you share one side of that, which is, it resulted in something that was, painful for you. But that can go another way as well. There's a story I share in a book that I have coming out. Oh my God, I'm plugging something.
Say the name of your book.
The Actor's Awakening. Yeah, I have a second title that I just settled on for it, and I'm trying to remember what the second title was for it.
Oh yeah,
it's expand your acting and craft through a spiritual perspective. Coming out hopefully by the summer on Amazon. But
nice.
Anyhow, in this book, I share this one story that has a lot to do with what we're talking about. And it was a situation I got together with a friend at a craft brewery. This is a number of years ago when, getting together was still a thing. And, and it had been a while since him and I had, gotten together and really had a conversation. And at one point during our conversation, I had a very conscious thought and response, like just internally with myself going, wow, I can't believe that we're having the discussion that we're having right now. Just in terms of the topics and how sort of, just the depth of the conversation was something that I'd never had with him before. And it sort of, I realized at that moment that it's like, oh, this image that I had of him, was unfair to a certain extent. It was just like, that's unfair. Like this is how I've always been seeing him, but there's a lot more to my friend who I've known for years than I thought that there was, and so I think we do a disservice to our relationships by not taking each other for who we are now in this moment. Not only because it can mean that we can have a stronger relationship, for dropping those images, which I think is kind of a fascinating aspect of this from where we started. Because like, we're afraid of losing something potentially. It's like, yeah, but maybe it opens the door to something much, much bigger. Maybe you're not going to lose that friendship. Maybe you'll actually deepen that friendship, by dropping those images, but your story also illustrates that there's a flip side of the coin to that, which is like, well, if you've got to take people for where they are, because otherwise you could be staying in something that's really bad for you.
Yeah, you brought up that other side of the coin, and I wasn't really thinking about that, but I know that's true, and it's kind of brought up some thoughts. Like, one is that we need to remain open enough with ourselves and with other people about that we could be more than we think we could be, and that they could be more than we know them to be. And that maybe they just haven't had that moment to shine yet. Maybe they haven't had that moment, to really show us what's possible. I had a friend come to an intro I did for one of my courses, and I was just like, yeah, I'm doing it. There's like 16 or 20 people there, or whatever. So we were hanging out, and he wanted to keep hanging out afterwards. I'm like, well, just come to the intro and then we'll hang out some more afterwards. Right. And my intros go for, at the time, at least they were going for like an hour, sometimes maybe 40 minutes, maybe an hour and a half if people had a lot of questions or whatever. And so he's like, yeah, sure, man. He sat down, watched the intro, and afterwards everyone kind of left, and he and I walked out around the corner of this building where it was. And he was like, where the hell did you learn to do that? I was like, what? It's like, just stand up in front of people with that kind of charisma and that whatever. And he was just like going off. And I was like, it's just like, this is kind of what I do. And he was like, wow. He's like, that was awesome. And I was like, yeah, right. Because you're my friend. I don't invite you to stuff like this. I'm not, like, I don't, so I never really, like, I'm not like Tony Robbins. I'm not like getting up in front of thousands of people and talking, right? But I was like, um, it was really kind of cool because I was like, wow, my friend is seeing something in me that he'd never seen before. And it kind of dawned on me in that moment that, um, well, not just the way that he saw me, but I also am like that with myself. Like, there's things that I've had moments where I've shared stories on this podcast where I've done things and I've been like, way to fucking go, Brandon. Like, you did this thing. But up until that moment, I kind of saw myself as more meek, or maybe like I didn't have that. And then a moment happened where it's kind of like, I mean, I just want to say, like, if anyone has listened to me talk, they know some of my stories, but like when you're pinned in the corner and you got no choice but to kind of like show up or cower, but really, for me, there was no cower option. It was just show up to it and rise to the occasion. Incredible, interesting things come out of you. But I think that's kind of possible for everybody. And kind of what you've pointed out to me is like, yeah, maybe I'm not giving people the allowance to really believe they can shine as much as they can. I feel like I'm an advocate to kind of like want people to shine, but like, yeah, I mean, people can surprise you. They can surprise you, and they can be more than what you think they are. And I think that's such a great side of it, because obviously the abusive relationship sucks. I mean, that's someone is not what you thought they were, and it's not so good. But like that other side, where I remember you telling me that story before, and I'm pretty sure I know what you're talking about. And like, what an amazing thing for you to be hanging out with this person. All of a sudden, your friendship just evolved, and I think that to your credit, you were open enough to see that and willing to accept that, because I think sometimes people see greatness in each other, but they don't give them the grace with it. So I think like the thing you did in that story, because I have heard it before, but I think the thing is like you gave the grace of, maybe this person is more than I think I know, because you knew them for a long time at that point. So I think it's our tendency to think we know somebody, right? So anyway, I wanted to point that out because, you granted your friend a freedom that he didn't have before.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, in some ways it was just sort of, it kind of happened, it wasn't something I was actively trying to do. It was
right.
Like just something that I was suddenly struck by. And it just kind of gave me an awareness of just like, oh, like maybe I should become more aware of this with my other relationships, and yeah. Just as you were talking, a few things were coming up for me, which is that, with this whole thing of image, with our own image and it more broadly, generally speaking, but like with ourselves, it's like, people might never, if you don't learn to drop your image to a certain degree, people might never really see who you are or know who you really are. But you might never really know who you are by not doing it either. That's, I think, a huge, it's almost like a cautionary tale, to say an abbreviated cautionary tale. People might never know who you are, and you might never know who you are by trying to keep up these images. And another thing that occurred to me is that, kind of within what I'm saying here is fear. Again, this, the image that we're creating out of fear, or the image that we're creating out of something else entirely. Because the image we create out of fear is a safety thing, right? But where am I going with this? There was somewhere where I was going with this. I don't know. It's like, because there's an image that comes about, I don't know, in some of those enigmatic figures of time where it's just like, you know, a lot of the time they're wildly successful people. But they're just so hard to pin down. You know, you're just like, whoa, like unpredictable. They're doing this and they're doing that. And it doesn't seem, they don't seem to fit a mold, you know, like I think we talked about this a little bit with when Dan Hines was on, you know, like they just, people who refuse, you know, they have such a powerful, because I can't think of another expression, but almost sort of like soul directed life. You know, I mean, that we can't put them into a box. There's something about them that refuses to be put into this place. And they're these figures who are just so kind of mysterious, but there's a kind of vitality to them, you know, and these figures emerge in every sort of generation. You know, I'm trying to think of like for some reason, like Richard Branson pops into my head right now. You know, it's like, here's this kind of crazy billionaire who goes off in balloons and does all kinds of weird and crazy shit, you know, and you know, that's the only one that's jumping to my mind now. But, you know, there are these figures who don't seem to be particularly concerned with how people see them, and they seem to walk with a tremendous degree of freedom.
I think that's what you're kind of pointing out, is that's the benefit of having freedom, is that you have options that most people don't have. You know, I think that's the downside of an image that you curate, or an image that you try to live up to, or an image you think you need to be a part of. It actually limits your options, and you get enslaved to it, and then you are restricted to act within it. You have to act accordingly, act according to it. And I think like there are people out there, and although others may have an image of them, another might have a drastically different image of them, you know. And like, for example, one of my favorite people in history, at least as far as acting goes, is Marlon Brando. And some people look at Marlon Brando and they go, "Oh, greatest actor who ever lived. He created the natural form of acting." You know, and there's other people who's like, "That guy's a crazy fucking lunatic, like, who had no self-control." Both are actually kind of true. But the one thing that I really admire about him, and I don't think he had a perfect life by any means, but there was an authenticity to his choosing, in my opinion, of the way that he went about his life. I mean, you know, just certain things he did, or, you know, and it wasn't perfect. I don't think he always made the right choice. In fact, I think he made some really poor choices. But if you listen to him later in his life, he had a lot of self-reflections about, you know, what it was like to kind of all of a sudden just be like a little kid with the candy store open to you, and you could have anything you wanted. And in fact, you could have everything for free, and it was all just being handed to you, and not having discipline, and not having parental guidance, and not feeling loved, and how almost irresponsible it is to give someone that type of options when they don't have the awareness or wisdom to know how to use it. And, you know, I think like we look at a lot of movie stars and people like that, you know, whatever, rich kids, maybe. This is funny, but we look at them and we're like, "Oh, what an asshole." And it's like, well, yeah, I guess, but also like maybe they didn't know how to handle the power that they just got handed to them. Maybe they didn't know, you know, and I'm not saying it's okay what they do. I'm not saying that at all, but I'm also saying like maybe that is not them. Maybe that's a product of like what happens, you know, like when we don't have guidance, when we don't have wisdom, when we don't have direction, you know. I think we make and it's kind of, Evan, to bring this around to my point here. I think we all want freedom. I think we all want autonomy. I think we like to have a certain amount of power and control over our lives. But what if you had ultimate power, control, autonomy, and freedom? Would you even know what to do with it? And would you be influenced to maybe do things that you wouldn't really do if you were really like acting from a place that was really truly connected, you know? And I think that we all make mistakes. We all do things that we flub. We do things that are wrong, bad even. But you know, I think also trying to understand that maybe that's not the person. Maybe that's the person in the position they're in. Maybe that's the culture they're in. Maybe that's them within the power they were granted that maybe they shouldn't have had that much access to. And I think that's just kind of devil's advocate to the other side of it, is that I think sometimes we have to pay for the consequences of the actions we take. But I also think that sometimes the actions we take are not always the actions that we would take, given the choice, given the ability to know better. So I think sometimes, you know, like I'm going off here, but like a criminal, for example, somebody who's been put in prison in Western culture, we kind of have like, well, you once a criminal, always a criminal, you know, but maybe that was a kid who did something really dumb and grew up in the ghetto, you know, and then got rehabilitated and kind of is coming out and trying to make something of themselves, you know, but we're so quick to say like, well, you did this thing, you're bad forever, you know, and you know, they don't do that necessarily in like Nordic countries or in the Eastern countries as much, although some of them are even worse. I'm not saying it's better, but you know what I mean? Like image and the labels we have can become extremely restricting. And also they're not accurate always in every way.
Yeah. Yeah. Moral of the story is we should all be highly skeptical.
Yes.
about this sort of image, this image culture that we're all participating in. We should all give some serious pause and thought to all of that, because like it can compromise, you know, it can compromise the lives that we pursue. It can compromise the integrity that we feel in our bones. You know, that's a really terrible one. That's a really bad one.
What do you mean? I love to hear you go into that a little bit.
I mean, I don't know whether I should share that story.
Maybe with that, you don't have to share the story, but maybe like your understanding of that, because there's something about that kinda...
Well, I mean, so I can probably put this in a more sort of general sense, but I've had experiences where I've felt, because of certain images I felt that I've had to uphold of myself, and the sort of identity associated with that, where I have made decisions that were against what I knew, like at my core was not the decision to make.
I understand.
Yeah. That's all I'm really trying to say. Is that,
but you make the decision, like you make the decision because like maybe there's some type of pressure or obligation or, you know,
I'm supposed to do this. You know, it's like,
I'm supposed to do this. Yeah,
I'm supposed to do this.
Sure.
Yeah, like, because this is how people see me, or this is what, you know, someone in my sort of category of person is supposed to do. This is what I'm supposed to want. This is what I'm supposed to, you know, all of these supposed tos. Even despite that sort of just that, you know, that pit in your stomach that says like, just don't. You know, it's like you can, but like this goes against something that's core to your nature.
Mm-hmm.
And the lesson is learned, obviously. In any situation that I can recall that fits the criteria that we're talking about. But it's a painful one. It's a painful one to go against that part of yourself. It's a really painful thing it's a tough thing to grapple with. And for me, has in every instance has taken a great deal of time to kind of come around on.
Yeah.
And I've learned more and more. It's like, okay, you trust that thing in the pit of your stomach, because because the consequence to that. And it's no consequence that necessarily is going to come from some other person, because there's nothing, I didn't do anything nefarious in the sense of like anything illegal. I didn't abuse someone. I didn't, what have you. But it was something that just for me, like within my own self, was just like, no, this isn't right. This is not right for you. So yeah, those moments those are some serious gut check moments, and I've learned to listen to them as I've gotten older too, because it's like, yeah, okay, I've experienced that enough that I know to listen.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that gut check thing, I think is such an important part of learning, guiding your own life, and there are people out there who kind of, they like to take that position of like, well, you have these gut instincts, but like, how often are they really right? And it's like, part of learning how to trust your gut instinct is about actually doing it wrong, so that what the feeling is like. And then the next time you've learned. So learning to trust your gut isn't going to you're not going to get out of that 100%. You're just going to have this gut feeling, and you just know what it is when you're born. It's something you learn, and you have interactions, sometimes with yourself, sometimes with other people or situations. And it's usually the times where you didn't trust it, but you had kind of a feeling, and you go, oh, and then the next time that feeling comes up, you kind of have a recognition and a relationship to it. And sometimes it takes us many times before we'll trust our gut feelings, but that's an important part of it. Mm-hmm. I have this, and I kind of want to mention that because I have this thing that I do, like in my courses, for example, which is, it's all about being authentic in like your vision and your expression and what you're trying to do. And I always ask my people that I work with, I'm like, well, what animates you? Like, cause there's the you that you think you are. And I think this is kind of the image, but like, what is watching you do that? This is this thing inside you that sees everything you do. And I tell you why I know this, because if you do something bad and you get away with it and no one else knows, and you got away with it, at the end of the day, you're still going to have to face yourself in the mirror. And who knows that you did it? Who's that person watching you in the mirror knowing you did it? That's what animates you. And so you got to listen to that thing. Because if it really is just about you in this life doing whatever you're doing, I mean, that's how sociopaths do it. That's how the psychopath does it. They don't have a good connection to that thing, right? It's that lack of self that actually in a lot of ways allows them to do that. But for the empaths out there, for the people who have some connection, you don't do it because you know you did it. So you don't do it. And it isn't about getting away with it. And actually take that even further. It doesn't just make you moral and ethical and a good person, but it actually is the magic sauce inside you that's going to allow you to create and animate yourself in a way that is totally unique and totally special and totally original. And I think that, kind of like what you're talking about that's that guide. We need to have that internal guide. And it needs to be more, we need to value it more than we do our image, because the image only cares about, did I get away with it or not? But the true self knows. And the way you look at yourself at the end of the day, regardless of how other people see you, inescapable.
Yeah. I have a saying that, as far as I know, is an original saying, but I'm sure the sentiment has been carried by someone at some point. But we can convince ourselves of anything but fool ourselves of nothing.
Hmm.
And I think that speaks to kind of what we're talking about here, which is just like, yeah, you can convince yourself. We can talk ourselves into all kinds of stupid shit.
Yes.
But we can't fool ourselves either.
No.
We can't fool ourselves, like, because most of the time those decisions are made and then we go, it's just like, I knew it. It's like, I knew that was a bad decision. I had this feeling and I didn't listen to it and whatever. It's like, that's that part that you can't fool. There's a part of us that just knows. There's a part of us that just knows. Yeah.
I said, actually, it's funny. I was, this was with a girl. This is actually the toxic relationship that I was in. And I remember I pointed this out and I said, because there was talking about like, because we were distant and whatever, like distance between us. And I was like, we were talking about, just kind of our connection and our loyalty and infidelity. And we were talking about all that stuff. And I was like, we're both good looking people. Like you could sleep with somebody, I could sleep with somebody. This is not going to be a problem for either of us. Like, and we're younger and man, like there's plenty of options. Right. And we were talking about it. I was like, the thing is that if one of us did it, we'll know we did it. And that will be the problem. Because you might be able to get away with it. I might be able to get away with it, but we'll know we did it. And then we'll have to live with that. And the thing is that will always be a thing between us forever in our relationship to ourselves through each other. And they were like, oh, and it like hit them. And I thought, that's the profound thing of having a relationship with self. When you're so aware that the bad thing you might do, could do, you have the option of doing, you wouldn't do it because that doesn't just go away if you get away with it. But I think a lot of people, they don't have a good relationship with self. That's why they often do stuff like that. And they don't realize why they're being tortured by it. And the only way out of it is admission and acceptance. And you have to forgive yourself, which is a whole thing, right? It's kind of like religion has tried to talk about that for fucking ever, that, like your relationship with self and they use spirit and God and all this type of stuff, and various ones, they use different analogies or ways of talking about it. But at the same time, at the end of the day, it's all the same thing. It's really just a relationship with yourself. And the good person doesn't just follow rules. They do things because they have a connection to why they do things. So, image is really a lot of bullshit, but it's a tool and we use it. And I'm not saying don't use it, but at the end of the day, understand that it's a tool that isn't real. It's just a tool. I have some more things to say about it. I don't want this to carry on too long, but I want to say one other thing about image, and I just mention it and we don't have to get into it, but power is a big thing. Like love and power are such big things in our culture. And we see nowadays a lot of abuse of power because power is hard to handle. And when you don't have a relationship with self, you're more likely to abuse power, in my opinion, because power gives you the ability to do things that maybe others don't have. And a person who's responsible in power doesn't do them not because they could get away with it, because they know, like, they have a relationship that it's not good. It's not about like being good or bad and how people will see that. It's like, because that wouldn't matter. Sometimes you have so much power, you can get away with stuff and no one would ever know you did it. But people who don't have a relationship with self are going to be more likely to abuse that power because it's all about image for them. It's all about how they're seen. But they'll pay for that consequence later, unless the only acceptance is unless they're like a narcissist or sociopath or psychopath or something of that nature, right? Like any normal person, any person with the ability to have empathy and connection to another as well as themselves, your actions will be with you for the rest of your life. and you'll have to find some type of relationship to them. You'll have to repent. You'll have to figure it out. Maybe that's to your God, maybe that's to yourself, whatever it might be. But you're going to have to forgive yourself if you do something that is bad and was not who you wanted to be. Sorry, Evan, I got to say this one last thing. There was something I did,
for it.
and I think this will hammer the point home. There's something I did, and I was really embarrassed about it for, probably a few years. And it was a secret. And I just did this thing, and I just really was not happy that I did it. I was ashamed. It's probably the best way to put it. And I just never wanted to tell anyone that I did it. And I was just so embarrassed, and I just thought so poorly of myself because of it. But I just tried to pretend it wasn't there, and I walked around through my life and I did my best. But then there came an opportunity, a moment where I could share it. And I just was like, I can't keep the secret anymore. I need to tell somebody. I need to come out about it. I need to just tell this to another human being and just fucking face the consequences. And I was so scared to say it. And then when I did, I fucking started bawling. Like, it was just like, because I felt like I hurt this person so much. I probably didn't hurt them nearly as much as I was hurting, but I was hurting, and maybe I didn't even hurt them, because I don't even know if they know that I did it, but I was hurting. And someone said to me, I forget what they said exactly, but it was along the lines of like, was that what you really wanted to do? And in that moment, I was like, it wasn't what I wanted to do. Like, it wasn't who I wanted to be. And I remember, like, I did it because someone hurt me. And I was kind of carrying a chain of hurt. They say hurt people hurt people. And in that moment, I realized, like, yeah, I did a bad thing. But like, also I was doing it because I was hurt. And I'm not saying that's an excuse. And I'm not saying that, my act was not, I had to face my demons because of it. You know what I mean? But everybody has stuff like that. And that's why I'm saying is sometimes we take action that isn't actually the way we would be, but maybe your parents hurt you. Maybe your past relationship hurt you. Maybe a friend hurt you. Maybe some situation hurt you. And then we take actions and we justify it by these things, but they aren't really us. And I think part of this conversation is finding a relationship to self. I think that's the big thing that I'm realizing, is because your image is not actually having a relationship to self, right? Because it's fake. It's kind of presentation. It's kind of false. So my presentation was, I never did this act, but then my admission of that act broke that image, but it got me to have a relationship myself, healed that, and then be able to move on and not be tortured by it. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that just to piggyback off of that a little bit, and, image is, we live in a world of images, and to a certain extent, it's unavoidable. I think it's just, there's a certain sort of attitude towards image that there's a confusion around image, which is, again, it's something that we look at and we think of and we try to keep as some sort of stable form, but it's not. Image is a fluid thing. It's moving. It's shifting. It's a dynamic thing, because that self that you are talking about, the big self with the capital S, that's a moving, dynamic, changing thing, like life is. That's kind of, maybe that's a way of putting it. It's the life. It's the core life that is within each and every single one of us. And life is change. That's another thing we want to talk about, like sort of spiritual, philosophical wisdoms throughout time. Change. It's like the only sort of constant that there is. The only constant is change. And we are that change. We are change. And the problem is that we get into these weird conflicts because we're trying to fix what is changing. We're trying to fix what is unfixable, and it makes us fucking crazy. for good reason. We're
Mm.
we're trying to do what is actually impossible. You know what I mean?
I do actually, because it's like I think a lot of the time we're trying to maintain an image and we're trying to keep it, and eventually, like the image that we're trying to curate and hold, eventually it kind of deteriorates from what it was and it becomes something else. And
It's being
sometimes it's just,
destroyed all the time,
yeah,
constantly.
sometimes it's just getting older. Sometimes it's just, just the change of life and situations and whatever. But like an image is very hard to keep the same. And also because it changes and evolves, we try to build on it, but it's always kind of falling apart too, as much as we're building on it. And yeah, I mean, it just becomes this kind of exhausting dance to keep it up. I think
Yeah.
everyone has a little bit of image, but when you're really like image focused, it becomes a really exhausting thing to do. It becomes like you have to you have to spin a lot of plates to keep the thing going. You can't let them fall, and you got all these things to kind of maintain. And then it's just like, where's the room for you?
Yeah. I mean, like I think one of the big ones that we come up against, and it's probably just about time we wind this one down. But I just think of like a big thing that everyone deals with. That's normally an image struggle for us, particularly in North America. But is or the Western world. I don't want to put any limitations on that, but the image of youth, of this thing of getting older, and this sort of clinging and grasping to our youth that happens so often. And it's just like, but it's done, like it's like, yeah, you were that when you were 22. That was you when you were 22, but this is you now at 36. This is you now at 48. Like whatever the hell it is, it's like that's you now. That's not the image of you anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It's changed, whether you like it or not. But that image is gone, but it's interesting how clinging to that image creates so much pain.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Brandon.
Okay. All right.
I'm drinking beer. You're drinking beer, I think.
I am.
What are you having?
All right. I will go first. This is from Hoyne Brewing Co. Carte Blanche is what this is called, and it's a Belgian white IPA.
Oh,
I don't think we've ever had this one on here.
I don't think so.
Nah, but it's got a cool can, and it's tasty. I like it. I would recommend it. I give it 2 thumbs up. It has 6% alcohol. It tastes pretty smooth. It's got a fair amount of hops in it, but honestly, you don't. Well, I'm finding that I'm not overwhelmed by the hops, even though like on the rating scale, it's like color's really low, malt's really low, hops is like fucking top of the charts. But at the end of the day, I'm like, nah, it's kind of a good little beer, and I've been enjoying it. So there you go, Evan.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'm drinking a peach ale called Peach Bod.
That's funny.
Yeah, no, that's
not really a good bod.
No, it's not. It's not. For everyone listening, it's a peach in like swim shorts on the beach, and he's got some guns, but he's a peach, so he's kind of round.
Yeah.
But yeah, I couldn't help but I was like, oh, that looks great. I'm gonna just go for it. It's from Parallel 49.
Nice. They always have funny pictures on their beers.
Yeah, and they make a lot of good beer. And it's delicious. It's really good.
I've always liked peach in beer. I always find that's a good mix. But that's just because I love peaches. What can I say?
It is kind of unusual though that peach and beer are just a fantastic combination
Yeah.
for whatever reason. Yeah.
I always find when they do a little fruit mix in there, it's always about the right balance. Cause like if it's just
Yeah.
enough to give it a little flavor, it's good. But if it's too much, it kind of becomes like all about that flavor that they put in. But
No,
I find, yeah,
this one strikes a really good balance.
nice.
Yeah, it hits
Nice.
it real nice. So, all right, sir, let's call this one. Let's wrap this
Let's
one
wrap this baby up. You first or me?
up. I mean, I don't know. I'll go. I don't know what
All
I'm
right.
gonna say, but but I'll go. No, this conversation has really kind of surprised me. Especially since it was a bit of a slog to even just get to having a conversation that we recorded. But I don't know. This has really opened up. Just I don't know. I have a more. I appreciate more the impact of image on my own sort of day-to-day life and how much that actually comes up in my life, how much that becomes a problem in my life, an issue. And I guess for me at this stage, it's really about not seeing it as something poor, not seeing it's not being judgmental about that when I'm aware of it, but just acknowledging it, just becoming more and more in tune of when the fearful image that I have, this sort of image that I have established of myself that I'm afraid of losing, that I'm afraid of appearing in some other way that could potentially be perceived as negative, which, as I talk about it more and more, it's just like, oh, that becomes such a weird, convoluted conversation to even have. But just becoming more conscientious of is this am I looking at this, is this anxiety, is this decision, is whatever it is that I'm experiencing, is this coming from that fearful image, or is this coming from that self that we talked about?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. That is great. That is a great way to, that's a great tool that I think we can all take, myself included, from this conversation, is to ask that question. Is this my image that's making this choice, or is this myself? This is my true self. And, thinking back to that moment I shared where, maybe I did something that wasn't really what I wanted to be and what I wanted to do. We've all had our moments, I'm sure. And if I would have had that ability to ask myself, is this what I want to do, or is this what my image wants to do? Maybe I could have rescued myself from a choice that, even at the moment, I mean, if I'm honest with myself, I knew it wasn't really the right choice, but I was caught in the inertia of my pain, and I'm not making an excuse. I take full ownership, even though I haven't talked about what that was, but it's like, I feel like it's human. I feel like, that's part of life. I personally, and I guess this is my final note, is that it's part of the human experience to be scared. And I think image, it maintains your fear more than it maintains your passion, your joy, your purpose, your direction, your true animated expression. So if you feel limited in your confidence, if you feel limited in your expression, I think that you got to look at your image and say, well, how are you holding me back from this? How am I honoring you more than I'm honoring what's inside of me? Because I think for me, I've had an interesting journey to get to this point in my life. And I had some really great high, wonderful moments of my youth, but I feel like now I'm truly at the best place I've ever been at in my life because, and you know this about me, because it was only a few years ago where I started to actually, for the first time, really start to be able to like hear my own voice and like listen to my true self. And it's caused me to make choices that I think have really given me the ability to be more who I really am deep down, whatever that is, and I feel like that's a discovery that's happening every day. And I've been more willing and more courageous to abandon the image and let that go and not like make that a bad thing because I can't appear the way I want to appear, because I won't lie. I still want to appear a certain way. I still have that desire sometimes to want to like almost look better or look cool or whatever. Cause I know that like, and here's the thing, image can get you stuff. It truly can. You can kind of do it and you play that game and it can kind of open some doors and get you some things. But letting it go and finding a sense of self, even though you have to go through that period of maybe not getting those kind of quick wins, it's just so worth it. And that's kind of where I hope everybody who walks away from this conversation, I hope that you'll be willing to kind of ask yourself, I think what Evan pointed out, is this my image that I'm trying to act out? Or is this what I really want to do?
Thanks for listening to the show. If you got something out of this, if you feel it improved your life or your journey in any way, please take a moment to subscribe, leave a review, or share the episode.
You can also support us on Patreon, where we have tons of great bonuses. You are the ones that make the show possible and help us to thrive. Thank you for joining us.